The future will be a total disaster with the collapse of our capitalistic system as we know it today, wars, massive government debt defaults, and the impoverishment of large segments of Western society. That's according to our guest today, Marc Faber. He's the editor of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report. So there's the gloom and the doom.
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
What are you so concerned about?
Well, I think that in the Western world, we have essentially standards of living that won't go up, and government debt is rising everywhere. We have stimulus packages. We have central banks that basically will print money, not just here in the United States. They have no other option than to keep the system going. And so this will be negative for the Western world compared to emerging economies. And already, if you look at the last 30 years, say, you look at China 30 years ago, you look at India 30 years ago, you look at Brazil 30 years ago, and you compare it to the US today. 30 years ago, the US is still way ahead of these countries. Today, you travel to Shanghai, Beijing, Sao Paulo, to Mumbai, and so forth. These countries, they've progressed dramatically, and in most of these countries, the standards of living on a per capita basis have been going up very substantially. In China, I would say that it's not problem-free, but everybody today lives much, much better than they ever dreamt 20 years ago, and per capita incomes in real terms have probably doubled every 10 years for the last 30 years from a low level. Now you look at Vietnam, a country with 80 million people, they have a per capita income of $800 US. It's easy to go to 3,000 US dollar per capita income.
So let's go back to the United States. So
Yes.
are you talking long-term decline and fall of the U.S. empire, or are you saying the idea that we're going to have a nice V-shaped recovery? Is
You're
that
an
a
optimist.
fiction?
It's fallen already. It's fallen already.
But so you're not referring to the specific recovery or lack thereof out of our current Great Recession. You're talking about long-term decline and fall.
We have to define what kind of a recovery we're looking at. We had a global synchronized boom in the period 2002 to 2007, and peak economic activity probably was reached at the end of 2006. After that, the economies in the world slowed down, and then September 2008 to March 2009, we fell off a cliff in the Western world. And now we bottomed out, and there can be some kind of a recovery, but we're not going to go back in the world to the prosperity we had in 2006 and to that kind of growth rates. And I believe we have now governments, and especially here in the United States, the stimulus today is a fiscal deficit of around $2 trillion. I don't think it will go down. It will go up, in my opinion. Number two, we have a money printer at the Fed, and he will print money and keep interest rates at zero, basically. And when one day interest rates should go up, he'll keep them below the rate of inflation, as Mr. Greenspan and he did after 2001, when interest rates were continuously below the cost of living increases.
Well, I think to Henry's point, there's a difference, though, between a sluggish recovery or even the 1970s style stagflation and the end of capitalism as we know it.
Yes,
I mean, what's going to be the trigger?
Well,
you're talking about economic Armageddon here.
Yes, absolutely. That I'm convinced. And that is, a high confidence prediction that the total collapse will come. And I'll explain how. The fiscal deficit of around $2 trillion will add, of course, to government debt. It will be, in future, very difficult for the Federal Reserve to increase short-term rates, because then the interest payments on the debt go up substantially. Then comes Medicare and Medicaid after 2018, and we have huge liabilities there that are coming due. And with the aging of the baby boomers, we'll have a huge problem in funding the expenditures of the government. And so they'll have to inflate. And the inflation, what it will do is will keep sentiment at a relatively high level, because people, they are expropriated without really noticing it right away. But one day they notice that the standards of living really go down and that the employment situation hasn't improved much. I don't think that employment will improve very much. It may stabilize but not improve much. And then to divert the attention from the public, the governments then go to war. And we have already 2 wars. And Afghanistan, I guarantee you, is a barrel without a bottom, bottomless pit.
All right, so 2 questions. One, is this going to be a military coup? What is it like when capitalism collapses? What happens?
Well, when it collapses, essentially you have a currency reform. that old money is then called back and you issue new money.
So the dollar
So we're going to get new dollars. It's going
Yeah,
to be
probably
Zimbabwe.
at some stage, yes, I would imagine that the dollar will lose its value. Yes, I mean, it already lost 95% of its value since the introduction of the Federal Reserve, but it took 100 years. This time around, they'll do it in 10 years. They have become more efficient.
They
at
have.
losing. Yeah.
And so when is this going to happen? I heard you say 2018, which for most Americans is basically, never worry about it, so far in the
100 years
future.
from now, yeah.
So when?
Well, I think, and I have to say, you can be bullish for the next 3 years, but ultra bearish for the next crisis, which may happen in 3 years or in 5 years or in 10 years. But one thing I want to stress, this crisis, nothing has been solved. That should be clear. The private sector, which is trying to deleverage, is offset by the government that is leveraging up. In other words, you don't reduce debts, you just essentially pile up on more debts, even more debts. And the problems haven't been solved, but they've been postponed.